Brother Russ.
Donnie, thank you. Mr. Stubblefield, come on up. We have a special speaker this morning. Herman Stubblefield. Some of you know him, actually. Born Viola, Tennessee, 1921. Volunteered for the Army Air Corps in June of 1942. Went to England, flew P-38s and P-51s. A fighter pilot. Survived. Flew 77 combat missions, actually took extra missions so he could get home sooner to come and marry his sweetheart. Married by her father, that must have been something else, to the saintly, the beautiful, the intelligent Rebecca Watson, who became Rebecca Watson Stubblefield. He retired as chief pilot for Vulcan Materials. He was a flight instructor before in the Army. He's been an elder for 11 years. Please help me welcome a man who turned down the promotion to Supreme Allied Commander because he had to get home and marry his wife. Herman Stubblefield.
Well, I do count it an honor and a privilege to be asked to speak to this group. However, I have to wonder why Russ asked me. If I'm introduced primarily as a veteran of World War II, you can see how out of date I am with anything that's going on today. Is that better? Well, let me try it like this. Now then, I would add that any experience I have that would qualify me to stand up here and teach is equally out of date. Now then, there was a time in my life that I was a regular Bible class teacher. In fact, I've had several periods doing that. But the very last one was 25 years ago, so I'm out of date on that too. With the introduction that Russ gave me, you can very quickly see how old I am. And I'm frequently accused of being the oldest member at Homewood. Now then, I probably am, I guess. I leave a little period of doubt because I know there are a few people, some of our lady friends in particular, that won't admit their age. So, that being the case, I have to acknowledge that there might be some members here a little bit older than I am. But it was just about a year ago right now that Sterling Brewer accused me of being the only one that kept him from being the oldest member here. More recently, Maurice Rogers has said essentially the same thing. So I am ahead of several people in that respect. Now, my time as a member at Homewood is about 44 years. And when I look around, I can imagine there are a goodly percentage of our members that weren't even born when I became a member here. Now then, to carry the history a little bit further, this congregation was originally organized about 66 years ago, so it had already been in existence about 22 years when my employment brought me to the Birmingham area and I became a member here. Now then, to add to all of this, I haven't even been a regular Bible class attender in nearly 9 years. And many of you know that I spent about the last 8 years with an almost full-time job as a primary caregiver for an invalid wife. And when that became necessary, that's when I quit being a regular Bible class attender. So I'm even out of date on that too. That leaves me wondering, what do I have to say to this group? Now then, several references have been made to my flying experience. And I can tell war stories, but the most interesting stories I can tell related to war experience are not necessarily about my own actions, but about people I knew. I knew a lot of people that had grander and wilder experiences than I did even, and I had enough. Now then, in the course of my 96 years, I have had some experiences that are interesting and enlightening, and I've seen a progression of things that were new when I first learned about them, but now then are common to everybody. Now, just one illustration of what I'm describing. In the early part of my flight training, I spent many classroom hours studying weather. Now then, anybody that pays much attention to TV Weather Channel today knows more about weather than anybody did back then. And I've learned some things about weather by being exposed to it that we weren't taught in the classroom. I will tell one story, and this is somewhat weather involved, and it illustrates what I'm talking about. I had an experience in 1944 while I was based in England, and I was up on what was planned to be a local test flight. When the superchargers on the engines of our airplanes had been worked on, we did a test flight to 30,000 feet altitude to be sure that they would still produce full rated power. So on this occasion, when I leveled out at 30,000 feet, I'm above essentially a solid cloud deck with occasional breaks that you could see through, but only occasional. And I was on a southerly heading for about 10 minutes when all of a sudden I happened to see a break in the cloud and saw that I was over water. Now then, what that meant was that I had flown completely out of England. I was over the English Channel, well on the way to the Normandy area of France. Well, I turned around and started back, and it took me 30 minutes to get back where I had just covered and 10 minutes going the other way. Now then, what had happened was, I know now, but I didn't know then, I had encountered the jet stream. Well, at that time, I had never heard of a jet stream. That terminology wasn't even used. And it was a few years later, after World War II, in the later 40s, that the Air Force did an organized investigation, a real organized study to determine what in the world was going on with high altitude winds. And as a result of that investigation, everybody now knows about the jet stream. If you pay any attention to TV weather, it's frequently mentioned in the forecast. But that's the way I first encountered the jet stream. And we're to what's supposed to be in this group, encouraging words. That's the title of the class. Well, I would like to put in some encouraging words. Now then, some of my favorite scriptures make me think of what I've observed in my flying experience. And along with that, I'll say one of my very favorites is the 19th Psalm. Let me read you what I'm talking about. The heavens declare the glory of God. The skies proclaim the work of his hands. Day after day they pour forth speech. Night after night they display knowledge. There is no speech or language where their voice is not heard. Their voice goes out into all the earth, their words to the ends of the world. In the heavens he has pitched a tent for the sun, which is like a bridegroom coming forth from his pavilion, like a champion rejoicing to run his course. It rises at one end of the heavens and makes its circuit to the other. Nothing is hidden from its heat. Now then, in flying experience, you get to observe God's creation in a way that you just don't see as earth dwellers. And the man that's the pilot of the airplane gets a view that most people never see. I'm told that a relatively small percentage of our population ever really flies in the first place. But even those that do don't see what the pilot sees. And even the pilot of a commercial airliner doesn't see what the military pilot sees because of the very construction, the way he's in a bubble in a fighter plane. He has a view that most people just don't get. Now then, to me, that gives you a special appreciation for God's physical creation, the heavens and the earth. And the scriptures bear that out. Now then, in Romans, in the first chapter, the Apostle Paul, thought I had it marked, pardon me for fumbling. The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all godliness, wickedness of men who suppress the truth by their wickedness. Since what may be known about God is plain to them because God has made it plain to them. Now then, here's the part I'm talking about. For since the creation of the world, God's invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature have been clearly seen, being understood from what has been made, so that men are without excuse. So what Paul is telling us, similar to what David said in the Psalms, we know about God just by viewing the creation. And what better way to view the creation than some of the experiences that I've been privileged to see. Now, to continue with the 19th Psalm, I read through verse 6. There is an abrupt change at that point in the psalm. Now then, Psalms 19 describes two different kinds of revelation from God. First is the physical revelation, same one that Paul referred to in Romans that I read. That's enough to tell us about God if we're willing to observe and believe. But then David continues in the 7th verse of the 19th Psalm, talking about a different revelation. We've just dealt with the physical revelation. The different one is the inspired word, the scriptures that we have. So here's what David said about that. The law of the Lord is perfect, reviving the soul. The statutes of the Lord are trustworthy, making wise the simple. The precepts of the Lord are right, giving joy to the heart. The commands of the Lord are radiant, giving light to the eyes. The fear of the Lord is pure, enduring forever. The ordinances of the Lord are sure and righteous altogether. They are more precious than gold, than much pure gold. They are sweeter than honey from the comb. By them is your servant warned. In keeping them there is great reward. Who can discern his errors? Forgive my hidden faults. Keep your servant from willful sins. May they not rule over me. Then will I be blameless, innocent of great transgression. May the words of my mouth and the meditation of my heart be pleasing in your sight, O Lord, my rock and my redeemer. There are other places in the Psalms where David has said some very wise things. Psalms 11:10. The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. Now then, also in Proverbs, we read, the fear of the Lord is the beginning of knowledge. Job said, the fear of the Lord, that is wisdom, and to shun evil is understanding. So, what do we mean by fear in this case? Now then, there's more than one definition of fear. Fear can be described or defined as this unpleasant emotional reaction when we anticipate danger. That's one kind of fear. But frequently in the scriptures, that's not what's being talked about. What's being talked about is a particular reverence and respect for God. That's the fear that we are encouraged to have as we regard God and his commandments. So I don't think I need to spend a lot more time since we got a late start here in the first place, for which I can say that's adequate. I've said enough. So thank you for your obvious kind attention. I can tell by looking at you that you have paid attention, whether I had anything worthwhile to say or not.